hearts be acceptable to thee, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So what does blessing little children have to do with divorce? And why are these two readings put together? It might make more sense if you knew what story came right before this one, and what came right before this one was what we had for last week's reading from the Gospel, where Jesus says, anyone who welcomes one such as this child welcomes me. That was actually the week before. And last week was, do not put a stumbling block in front of these children. If you do, it would be better for you to have a rope tied around your neck attached to a millstone, and you were thrown into the sea. So the treatment of children has something to do with this reading. Or could it be that he says, do not treat one such as this with disrespect, or put a stumbling block in front of one such as this? Because all Christians in the early way of Jesus were called children. We're children of God, just as the Jewish people are children of God. And we are talked about as children as long as we understand the humility of being a child, because children have no real power or authority. They can't make their own bottle and take it off the stove and serve themselves. They can't change their own diapers. And we are to think of ourselves as that helpless, that we need Jesus for absolutely everything. So enter stage one, Francis of Assisi. 800 years ago, he took this part of the scripture about being a child very seriously. He was raised up in a family that had a lot of money. They had an inherited fabric business, so his father made cloth, very rich cloth, very expensive cloth. And Francis grew up, in the upper middle class of his little culture in Assisi in Italy. What happened to him was he really wanted to be a minstrel and convince some woman with his beautiful voice and his minstrel talents to marry him. But he thought, no, I have to be a knight first. So he wanted to be a knight and a minstrel and have lots of money. So the occasion came for him to serve as a knight, and he donned his armor and went off to serve in the name of the woman he's going to court. And he got immediately captured and put into prison, where he nearly rotted to death. When he came home, finally, his health had been adversely affected, and he'd been shaken to his roots. And because of that experience, he rethought and started listening to the gospel, this part about being very humble and very vulnerable, and he took it literally. He threw away all ambitions his parents had for him and those he had for himself. He didn't want to be a merchant of cloth. He didn't want to be a knight. He wanted to be the lowest of the low. He went outside of his village and he found someone that was suffering terribly from leprosy. And he felt this love come over him, which he knew wasn't part of him because he hated leprosy and he was terrified of getting anywhere near someone with that virulently contagious skin disease. So it was through a power not his own that he found himself walking up to this man, covered in sores, reached his arms around him, hugged him to his chest, and kissed his cheek. He knew his life was changing, but this is a little radical. What happened was the beginning of this huge movement, the Franciscan movement. We sang all those verses of that hymn, so I'm going to make this sermon a little shorter. All the verses of that hymn, because those were his words. He wants to praise everything that has us connecting to God and his creation. What the reading about divorce has to say is Jesus catches these Pharisees, these supervisors of God's word, is how they see themselves. They have an important job, and that's to weed out the hoi polloi, so that only those who are just and righteous get to reach the temple. He gets to call them on their own behaviors and say, it's not whether divorce is in the Jewish law or not. It was misused. Just before this story, Herod had John the Baptist's head brought to them on a platter. And the reason he was beheaded was because John the Baptist had originally said, you have sinned by taking your brother's wife for your own. So That might be who Jesus is referring to, because he had just talked about John the Baptist in the previous page also, who had just died. The reason he died was because of the vindictive wife of Herod. She didn't want to go back to her first husband. She wanted to stay with Herod and keep all the power, and she's the one who ordered John the Baptist's head on a platter. So this divorce can wreak havoc in high places, but it can also wreak havoc when people misinterpret the Bible. Who has heard of a friend or personally experienced being turned away from receiving Holy Eucharist because they were divorced? Who has been turned away because of these verses saying, it says here a man and a woman, like it has to be a man and a woman? Who has heard people use that in a hateful way? That is not what these verses say. They say we are created in the image of God. Yes, we are created woman and man. We have inclinations that we were born with to find a partner in life, non-gender specified. We fall in love with whom we fall in love. Where the holiness comes is that this is a covenant we make with God, that under God's beautiful rainbow of possibilities, we choose to be committed to this person and not to use divorce as a cudgel to punish or hurt people. How many were told after their divorce? I was one, so I know I was told this. I should have done more to keep my husband satisfied. It's the woman's responsibility to keep a happy home. The things they've done in the name of Scripture make me cringe. That is not what these verses say. What Jesus wants us to know is that creation is a beautiful thing, and that as Christians, we are the new creation. Because we are forming ourselves after somebody who got so humble, and he told his disciples this, is that I am going to be betrayed, and I'm not going to fight it. I am going to be put on trial, and I'm not going to fight for my life. I'm going to die, and I'm going to molder in the dead tomb for 3 days. He says all this, and he does all this. And then I'm going to rise again. And that's the part we have trouble with. We get the death, we get the moldering, we get the sin. We don't get the joy of resurrection. That there is new hope for someone after an unhappy marriage that did not involve vows that were made with the real purpose of staying celibate or staying united to one person. We have to know what the original intent was, is that God's children should be happy. If you have an inclination not to get married, is that okay? Yes. Do you need to be criticized for not having a husband or a wife? No. In fact, this is one thing that Francis did. He did see in the Scripture, and he's correct, the permission to be celibate if you want to be celibate. But it's the recognition that this is a gift from God. It's not that you have bad inclinations, therefore you have to be celibate. Never. Some people are born, and St. Francis was one of them, to give their lives entirely to God, to sing joyful things all the time. He never stopped being joyful. It was very annoying to his brothers. It was. He preached like a bird. He could sing beautifully, and he had long sermons. So I'm going to quit in a moment. But the way that we are children is that we are defenseless, and we don't like being defenseless. We still see power getting the upper hand. We still see women's stories getting ignored. And that's going to be the way the world is. It doesn't have to be Jesus' way. It doesn't have to be our way. We love those who are persecuted. We minister to those who are hurting and sore and have had a divorce. We don't blame women. We don't blame sexual inclinations, whatever they are. We are meant to live a life of love and inclusion and joy